welcome to those of you who've just joined us. I'm Laura Stebbing, co-CEO of accelerateHER. I'm thrilled to introduce this next session on enabling a sense of community during a pandemic. This year has changed the way that many of us live and work. Suddenly, the importance of our local communities has been really brought to the forefront, and there's no one better to talk about the role of tech in supporting these communities than Sarah Friar, OBE, CEO of Nextdoor. Sarah has a pretty exceptional bio. Prior to joining Nextdoor, she was CFO of Square, where under her leadership, Square launched its IPO in 2015 and added 30 billion in market cap. Before her tenure at Square, Sarah held executive roles at Salesforce, Goldman Sachs, and McKinsey. She sits on the board of Walmart and Flack, and is co-founder of Ladies Who Launch, a non-profit that celebrates and empowers women entrepreneurs. I'm also delighted to introduce our wonderful moderator, Priya Guha. Priya is venture partner at Marion Ventures, a VC investing in women-led innovation. She's a member of the Innovate UK Council, non-executive director at Digital Capital, and adjunct faculty at the Ashbridge Halt Business School. She was previously ecosystem GM for Rocket Space and launched their UK operations. She sits on the advisory board of Tech London Advocates and chairs the board of trustees of Modern Muse. Last year, Priya was named top 5 Asian women in tech and top 50 most influential women in UK tech. 2 incredible women that I'm excited to hand over to. And Priya, delighted to pass over to you now.
Thank you so much, Laura, and a real pleasure to see you again, Sarah. So Sarah, wanted to kick straight off with the really key point that Laura raised in her introduction. The world really does look so different than this time last year. The pandemic has most of us living a new hyper-local lifestyle, leaning on our neighbours in a way that we never did before. How are you adapting the technology that you use at Nextdoor to respond to the changing needs and habits of your users?
Yeah, thank you, Priya, and it's so great to see you. You're my top woman in tech, just so we're clear. You're right. We could never have imagined where we would have been. In fact, my last trip on an airplane was to the UK. So I was actually in the UK in February, meeting with our neighbors in real life. And yet, look at where we are today. For those of you who don't know Nextdoor, Nextdoor is the neighborhood hub, and it really starts with utility. People come to the platform because they want to get something done. Help me find a plumber, or I'm in search of an extra chair for a dinner party. I wasn't expecting people to all arrive. But they stay for the community. They stay for that connection. And so what we've seen change with the pandemic is first a massive shift to focusing on local. So your neighbors really did become your first line of defense, right? It wasn't your friends, like some of my best friends live in the UK. Sadly, they weren't that helpful when I needed toilet paper. We also see that for isolation and connectedness, a lot of the research we've been working on shows that if you know about 6 neighbors, it actually makes a huge impact just on your mental health. So how we changed our technology first was to make sure the most accurate real-time information was always available on the platform from the best resources. So folks like the WHO, or in the case of the UK, folks like the UK government. Here in the US, the CDC or your local governor. Next up, we really leaned into help. We saw the word help usage go up 385% just from February into March. Showing that neighbors wanted to be there to help. So we launched products like Help Map and Help Groups. And then most recently, we've really been leaning in a lot on local businesses, recognizing that if phase 1 of the pandemic was really about health and essential workers, phase 2 has really been about the economic impact, particularly to those local businesses that really make our high streets vibrant, make our towns and villages vibrant. So we're doing a lot to make sure that they can come back perhaps in a different way, but come back healthy.
Well, it seems like all of those changes that you made really did have an impact on the usage of the platform. I understand that between February and March this year, the Nextdoor numbers of people who were using the platform increased 80% each week. How have you navigated that pace of growth?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and that's what we saw, particularly on daily active members coming to the platform, right? We've always seen people come back monthly or weekly, but people coming every single day. I mean, navigating it is first and foremost working with your team. You want to make sure you're there, that you're always up. And so there was definitely moments in time in March and April where I could see my engineering team, for example, pulling all-nighters, pulling weekends, And the great thing about purpose-driven companies is I find people really do rise to meet the moment, because it's more in some ways than just showing up to create technology or create software. I think this is where, as a leader, really making sure you're leading with purpose at your company pays huge dividends. People absolutely are at Nextdoor to cultivate a kinder world where everyone has a neighborhood to rely on. We talk about that purpose statement all the time, and we really try to make sure we're living our values. Number one value, earn trust. Number two, invest in community. And I could go on, but those two are always top of mind. It's good to remind we're in 11 countries, so this was a somewhat global phenomenon for us. We actually saw our first big increase happen in Italy and then Spain, come to the UK, cross the pond to Canada and the US, and then actually Australia was a little bit towards the end of the first phase. And then of course, Australia shut down. So every market in the end saw this impact and saw this rise in usage. But it's really been an amazing time to be a leader in any industry, but I think particularly in the tech industry.
You talked earlier, Sarah, about the importance of you focusing the technology for your business around local businesses in your Nextdoor communities. How have you been supporting those businesses, and what do you think businesses can think about in order to bounce back after the stresses they've been through during COVID-19?
Right. So it's always a two-sided network, right? The businesses need neighbors as their customers, and neighbors need businesses to be able to keep their community alive. What we saw in particular was this rise of neighbors saying we want to support a local business, almost a 7x rise in conversation about local business. And we know that from some of our research, over 70% of neighbors say they intend to shop more local right now. So what we wanted to do was create ways to create those connections. So for a local business, we now enable them to not just claim their page on Nextdoor, where tens of millions have already done that, but we are allowing them to post into what we call our news feed. And why that's important is, as local businesses have pivoted to survive, they really have to be over communicating with their customers. It might be explaining what you're doing to keep your customers safe, to keep your employees safe, to keep your business safe. It might be new opening hours. It might be, if you're a restaurant, perhaps you're now doing delivery and takeout. There's a great example, Applegate Farm down in Hampshire, Applegarth Farm, sorry, down in Hampshire. Will Benson is the owner, and he did a wonderful pivot of recognizing his restaurant couldn't open, but he could sell organic produce from their garden, organic produce. I should use my real English now, not my American English. It's just one example of a business that really pivoted. Beyond that, we have a concept of local deals. We actually worked with Barclays in the UK to get that off the ground. A local deal is just a way for a business to put an ad into the news feed to say, hey, I've got something to offer my best customers, my neighbors. I'll give you another example. I saw a dry cleaner in London who, recognizing that perhaps he wasn't going to have the same clientele of people getting their shirts cleaned for working in the city anymore, recognized that people were in their houses and wanted to do things like clean their curtains or clean their bed linen. And so he was putting out a deal to say, hey, I'm available to do that, and I'll give you 20% off. And what businesses get on Nextdoor that I think is important, it's different from other platforms, is what we call instant distribution. So they immediately get to talk to all of the neighbors in a given area. That can be 100,000, 200,000 people. So unlike, say, an Instagram where you have to get followers, you have instant followership. And we think that's important to make that connection happen.
And so maybe turning from businesses to individuals who are using the platform, when it comes to using technology as, you know, a social enabler, what do you think works and frankly, what doesn't work?
So I do think it has to start with purpose. Like, I think there's an authentic feel that you get from all brands, by the way, not just technology platforms, about, are you really here for me, or are you just here to make some money? And I think COVID-19, when I've seen brands really fly, is when they've recognized that their customers don't just want to be sold something, they actually want to know that you're there to help. And that's why it was important for us to build products like Help Map or help groups, right? We don't monetize those, that's not part of our business model, but it's very, very much part of why we want to create connections. Beyond that, we've also thought about a lot of where can we bring academic research into our work in a way that seems seamless, right? You don't want it to feel too wonky, but a place where I think platforms really can sing is when we're fixing a societal problem. So one of the things I saw even before COVID-19, just traveling around the world, was how often the concept of loneliness would come up and how often being able to reach out to your neighbors would help cure that. There's a good neighbor that I met actually last time I was in London. And her husband unfortunately passed away. He'd been a correspondent with the BBC. They were real film buffs. And so she opened a movie theater in her garage for 16 people. And 16 of her neighbors would show up on a fairly regular basis, and actually would donate. And those donations all went to the local Humane Society. It's amazing what she has done. But it's a great example where our research shows that by creating these weak ties, you create stronger communities that actually, when tragedy hits, those stronger communities tend to thrive more. We're seeing it right now with wildfires here in California. So that's a good place too, where we tend to try to work with academics around the world on these bigger societal issues as a way to ultimately make our platform a better platform and hopefully a much more thriving platform too.
Well, I hope she's been able to restart her cinema now with the gradual loosening of lockdown in the UK. And the flip side of that question is, I guess, sort of what doesn't work. So what are you sort of consciously not doing because you've seen it not working elsewhere?
Sure. So we are very careful about this idea of thought bubbles. So if you think about other social networking platforms, right, you often end up in a thought bubble, right? You're with your friends, or you can defriend people and not follow them. And so suddenly it feels like everyone is agreeing with you. And one of the things I think we've really lost globally, and I certainly see it in the US at the moment, is the ability to have conversations where we actively disagree on really important topics, but to have those conversations in an agreeable way. So you can disagree, but not be disagreeable. So what's been important at Nextdoor is not to allow those kind of thought bubbles to grow. And neighborhoods, the amazingness of a neighborhood is actually the diversity of the people who live there, and the fact that you're getting diversity of opinion, diversity of thought. And so we really try to more engage people to say, okay, have these tough conversations. A good example is we've built a groups product where when we see a conversation starting to get very heated, we will actually move it over into a group. And we do that because we want the conversation to continue, but we're also aware that in many cases, other people can be put off, and particularly things like politics are a classic example, as you would know well. Another example is slowing people down. So most platforms actually go for speed, right? We all know that when you kind of heat up the conversation and get people going fast, they post more frequently, and that drives engagement. And we actually took a different tact at Nextdoor. We actually try to slow people down. A great example is an interstitial, we call it a kindness reminder. So when we see you being about to post something that our machine learning says, hey, this is probably content that will get moderated or get flagged. If you put something and I was like, you moron, that word would kind of pop up kindness reminder. And kindness reminder is taking us out of kind of our biased brain, so kind of our dinosaur brain, that's all about fast-paced flight or fight reactions. It's causing us to read, which brings us back into our cognitive brain. It's also implying that what you're about to do may get reviewed in a future state, which research shows people actually behave better if they think what they're doing gets reviewed. So in doing kindness reminder, what we found is almost 30% of posts did get edited. And we absolutely see kindness reminder not firing as frequently these days. So we know we're actually norming people. So it's very different from what other platforms have chosen to do. We think it's the right thing to do, even though we know it potentially harms our engagement, but we think it's a better long-term strategy if our whole goal is how to create kinder, more connected communities, that will be better for our business over time, even though it has a short-term hit to it.
So I suppose a related question is around, as those neighborhoods and localized living becomes really core to how we're all living our lives these days, what is the responsibility of online platforms to maintain that cohesion and mutual respect that you've just been describing you've prioritized in Nextdoor?
Yeah, I actually think we all have a responsibility there. So first off, where I started actually when I said getting the right information, the most accurate information, and making sure it's clearly sourced. So people generally don't want to mislead others, but it's a classic thing that a neighbor sees something and decides to post it. You know, maybe it's how to keep yourself safe from coronavirus. And very quickly, you've got the world of kind of anecdotes and potentially even conspiracy theories suddenly thriving. And so that's why it's important that, first of all, information from accurate sources is always flagged first, right? We've worked very hard with folks in the UK, like UK government, uk.gov, Mayor Khan, for example, in London, in France, the French Ministry of Health, right? All of these institutions to make sure accurate information is there. I think the second piece is really making sure that when we use technology, we use it to elevate conversations that we see, quote unquote, going the right way, where connectedness is being created. And again, a lot of it can be about norming the good rather than only thinking about the bad. It's actually amplifying when good things are happening. This is why we do a lot of Good Neighbor Awards all around the UK, all around the various countries that we're in, because in showing people almost like a best practice, it's a way to help them say, okay, I could do that in my neighborhood too. I once had this great experience in Amsterdam where an elderly gentleman actually said, you must have a database of great ideas. And I was like, wow, that's such an interesting way to put it. But you're right, we actually have a database of great ideas, right? When we see neighbors in Tuxteth turning back alleys where drug use had been happening into oases of gardens, right? Isn't that a great thing that other neighbors should hear about and do? And then finally, we do look for organizations. The one I would give a huge shout out to right now is the eSafety Commission in Australia. They have been doing a really good job of creating diligence checklists, actually as an investor, for you to think about. So even as investors come to invest in startups or even more mature companies, part of your diligence should be how are platforms dealing with security and safety. Their focus has tended to be more around children, but their questionnaire is actually pretty broad-based. And I think we're going to see more of that happening. It's a little bit like ESG investing, right, where people wanted to know what was going on in the supply chain. I think that technology is going to start to see people asking more about the safety side of what's being built. And, you know, how are you being accountable to that? How are you reporting on that?
So you talked a bit about the work that you've done with the UK government, with Mayor Khan's team. Can you talk us through a bit more about how governments here or elsewhere around the world where Nextdoor are operating have integrated with your platform?
Yeah, so, you know, if I go to the UK first, we worked a lot with the NHS throughout COVID. Right, they clearly wanted to get their most recent information out, or even just, you know, Mayor Khan actually did a really good job of the clap for the NHS. So sometimes it's not just information, sometimes it's a way of wanting to give back. Here in the US, you know, very top of mind examples at the moment are emergency services. So I'm in California, we're clearly dealing with the worst, actually the second and third worst wildfires the state has ever seen. And this is very early for fire season even to have started. And so it's a good example where we're working with the state to make sure that as a fire is spreading, we're getting the right information into a neighborhood. Another example would be, we have a lot of hurricanes on the other side of the United States, or we just had Hurricane Laura pass up into Texas and Louisiana. That's where we'll work with an agency like FEMA, where they actually want to be able to use our location-based ability to say, okay, if you're in this neighborhood, you need to leave immediately. If you're in this neighborhood, you need to stay, but batten down the hatches. And if you're in these neighborhoods, you're safe right now, but you should be prepared. And then, you know, after the fact, maybe you want to come help. Now, hurricanes are volatile beasts, so they don't just follow the track that we thought they were going to be on. So this is why an organization like FEMA likes Nextdoor so much, because then as that hurricane starts to shift and maybe, you know, move to the right, move to the left, you can really update at a neighborhood level the right information into the right places. So We certainly don't want to only be the platform for crisis, but in a crisis, it is your neighbors who come save you. It is unfortunately not your friends. And I think we've all experienced that during COVID, right? I have really been grateful for my neighbors in Northern Ireland who are helping take care of my parents through all of this.
Yeah, as we all are for our neighbours at these moments. And just for those of you who are not familiar with how the US operates, the FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Authority. So basically the Emergency Response Department. You talk about a crisis there, and I think, you know, one of the things that Nextdoor has had to think about over its time is really the risk of people being racially profiled on the platform. I know this is something that you've really prioritized addressing. Do you want to tell us a bit more about how you've dealt with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I think what COVID-19 has also exposed, right, is just the degree of inequity in our world, broadly speaking, right? We know there's systemic racism in the United States, but really seeing it come to the fore in terms of healthcare outcomes and death rates and so on, I think has been shocking and is clearly fueling the current unrest. In Nextdoor's case, right, we are definitely aware that when we see racism happen in the world, it can happen on the platform. But we want to be definitive that there's no place for racism on Nextdoor, and we will remove content and frankly remove members if we think they're not adhering to our community guidelines. In the case of racial profiling, about 5 years ago, 2015, we saw the first really outcomes of this starting to happen, where people were using race as a description, describing an activity going on with someone in a neighborhood. And so we immediately started to work with a professor out of Stanford, Professor Jennifer Eberhardt, professor of psychology. She's written an amazing book called Bias. And what Jennifer really taught us was this skill set of slowing people down. And so today, when you post in safety on Nextdoor, we ask you to describe, first of all, what is it that the person is doing that you think is potentially a safety risk? And we actually remind people what racial profiling is. There was no definition of racial profiling in 2015 in the world that everyone agreed on. So we worked with a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of academics and really got that tight into a little box where people could read it to say, you may be engaging in this, I'm sure you don't mean to, but by the way, describing someone walking in a neighborhood because they are a person of color is not a safety issue nor a crime issue. So that's number one. Number two is when they describe the person, we ask them not to use race as a descriptor. So please use what's the person wearing? Are they male? How tall are they? How heavy set are they? And so on. We also remind people, even in that part of the flow, that of course you should be talking to the police in this case, not necessarily your neighbors. So in doing that, we actually saw the instance of racial profiling posts drop by 75%. So I think it's an example where working with the right experts, getting in place a lot of testing to get the right flow, you really can slow people down and I think create better outcomes. Are you going to solve it all? No, it's like fraud. It's always evolving. Right? Societal norms are always on the move, and that's why we have to stay on the move against them to make sure that we're constantly fighting the good fight to create better, more trusted interactions on the platform. But it's something we care deeply about and have a real commitment to.
So Sarah, we are unfortunately going to have to wrap up soon, but I did want to make sure I asked one question before we do, which was, you know, in your own personal experience of leadership, both in the roles that you've led at so many of the technology businesses that everyone is familiar with, but also in your nonprofit, Ladies Who Launch, which supports women-led businesses in many parts of the world. You must have seen some great examples of women's leadership. What advice would you share with women who are looking to aspire to leadership positions in tech or elsewhere?
Thank you, Priya. And so for sure, Ladies Who Launch, which is a charitable organization, we've done some great events in London. We actually had Jo Malone come speak. She had me in tears. We've done multiple events in Belfast, so going home to Northern Ireland for me. And it is always so uplifting just to hear women talk to each other. Frankly, peer mentorship, I think, is incredibly valuable. Although we just launched our launch program to put some money behind these women too, and I can't wait to bring that to the UK. I mean, in terms of advice, first of all, one of my favorite sayings, actually stolen from my husband, is you can't increment your way to greatness. So I do think as women, we need to be able to take big, bold bets, right? Take them in a principled way, do the work, don't just randomly take risks. But I think thinking bigger, this is how you create big companies and big organizations. You're not going to do it incrementally. I think the second thing is just the best piece of advice I ever got from another woman who mentored me was to spend time on my strengths, not my weaknesses. And I see this all the time when I'm coaching women or giving women a performance review. We have such a tendency, massive stereotype going on right now, but such a tendency to hear the negatives and then go away and have whole plans of how we're going to turn all those things around. And in reality, you're better off actually leaning into your strengths and becoming 10x on the spikes that you have, and then go hire people that are really good in the areas where maybe it's not your strength. And frankly, it's probably not your strength because it's probably not your interest. So why spend your life on something that you're not super excited about? So definitely leaning into those strengths. And then finally, I think right now, I might not have said this a year ago, but I'm a working mom. And so I think it's just important to remember about your well-rounded health. What I mean by that is your physical health, making sure you're taking some time to exercise. I go for a walk every night. I call it my commute because it's my way of walking from this office down to our house. And I found when I did it in a minute, I was not prepared to be a good mom. So just to save my family, I now go for a walking commute. So there's a half hour for me to gracefully get off the 50,000 miles an hour spinning that's going on in my head. But also mental breaks, really important to think about, just maybe some meditation, something that just can calm the mind, because that's how you're going to bring your best self to work. But those three things really stick with me at the moment.
Well, those are amazing pearls of wisdom. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us, and just a delight to see you again and to have the chance to hear more about the amazing work that you're all driving at Nextdoor. I'm going to hand back to Laura to close the session.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Sarah and Priya, for that wonderful conversation. We could have had it go on for hours. I just love Sarah's point about how everything at Nextdoor starts with purpose, and that's been the real kind of driver behind the growth. It's just so impressive. And also not incrementing your way to greatness. It's excellent. Thank you also to everyone who's joined in. Please stick around for our next session, which is on investing to build the new normal, where we're bringing together some really exceptional VCs on what they're investing in right now to build our new reality. So hopefully see you soon.